This is my Hawker Fury. This is a quarter scale model, 90 inches, 32 pounds in weight, dry. It's powered by a Laser 300, a 50cc V-twin 4-stroke, a fine British product. I started building this model in 2006 and it finally flew in 2018. It's based on a set of 3 views by Peter Westberg that were done in the 1970s, I think. And while they're a good set of drawings, there's some issues with the cross-section of the front end of it, which I couldn't make work when I started building the plug for the fuselage. It wasn't until I saw a whole lot of different photos and managed to go and see the full-size aircraft that I started to understand the shapes that made up the front end. It makes a huge difference to the way models of this aeroplane look. So I think I got it more right than wrong anyway. So I'm quite happy about that. HAC and Rye are the people who built the full size, and they were very generous in their with their time and access and the information they were able to send me. The full-size Fury was a composite aeroplane of its day. It was made of wood, metal, fabric, aluminium form paneling, and it was all driven around by a Rolls-Royce Kestrel V12. The early models of it had about 550 horsepower, and it had a fixed pitch propeller of about 10'6" diameter and 15-foot pitch. So it must have been interesting waiting for it to get off the ground eventually, but they weren't particularly heavy aeroplanes, and they were their first RAF fighter to be able to do 200 miles an hour in a straight line. I did a build on RC Scale Builder of this over the years. I went through all sorts of iterations with it, and it's I'm sure Mike can point you in the right direction of that link if you want. I'll do some smaller videos or shorter videos of parts of the aeroplane that I wanted to sort of show you today of some of the things that I faced. So I'll do them in steps. The model was covered with silk and tissue. It's something I haven't done before. Probably I shouldn't have. However, it's what I chose to do because I really like the finish of the silk. It's such a fine weave, and it just has I think a better presentation than some of the coveralls and Solitexes and Orotex and so forth. Probably in hindsight, I should have bought large stocks of Solitex. However, I didn't. If I was to do it again, I would probably do it in coverall. I've used that before and I quite like it. It's a very strong material. The problem is that dope is getting harder and harder to find these days and buy here, particularly in New Zealand. Makes it difficult. The rib stitching was done primarily in sort of 3 parts. The base, the normal sort of tape that supports the rib stitching was done with Tamiya tape, and I did the ribs, the actual stitching itself onto that tape and then put it onto the model and then put the cover over the top of it. You may be able to see there that the rib stitching is not the full width of that tape, it's only a part of that tape, because when you look at the full sizes of it, the ribs aren't that wide to sew around. So typically they're a 2-inch tape, a 1-inch support tape, and then they've got the rib stitching over the rib itself, which I think is only about probably ½ an inch at the most. The rib stitching is done as per full size. I took a lot of photos of the change to the rib stitching as it went from out of the prop wash and into the normal airflow, so it makes a bit of difference. So the rib tapes themselves are frayed silk. This is an unbelievably thankless task. I think Christina and I spent about 3 months, buddy, on putting these tapes on over the aeroplane. It's to try and get the silk weave in a straight line and pull out 10 or so pieces of silk to get that frayed edge is just a mind-boggling nightmare. However, it makes a huge difference to the aeroplane. It gives it so much presence, and I was really pleased with the outcome. So that's basically the fabric covering. I don't think silk is quite as durable as coverall. I've sort of knocked it around a little bit, and it doesn't take puncture wounds particularly well, but nevertheless it does give a brilliant replication of the surface texture of the model and of the full size. By far and away the hardest thing to build on this model were all the aluminium panels. Originally I made a fiberglass cowl or fiberglass front end of the aeroplane, and the intention was to paint it or cover it or do something with it to generate the aluminium look of the aeroplane. Initially I painted it with some of the chrome paint that's around. It's really expensive paint. Things like McLaren's used to have them, Mercedes used to have the same sort of things on their Formula One cars. It's really expensive. I did manage to get hold of some. We painted it. It came out way too dark, so I wasn't really happy with it, and there was about $500 down the toilet. The next thought I had was to use some of the car auto wraps. You can buy chrome and polished aluminium and the like. And while it would probably look alright flying past at 50 feet, it's got a very fine hex glue pattern in the back of it. And if you overstretch it or press it down too hard or whatever, that comes through onto the chrome finish, and it just spoils the look of it. So that went out the toilet. That was about $200 worth. So eventually, I have a friend lives down the road from me. He's an aircraft restorer. He's got the best looking tiger moth in the world as far as I'm concerned. And he nagged me about doing all these panels in aluminium. As he said, nothing looks like aluminium than aluminium. So he said, I've got a friend that lives just around the back of you actually, and he's a restorer of cars, and he does Ferraris and Bentleys and various other bits and pieces. He's an absolute craftsman. He's been doing it for 30 plus years, Mike Roberts. And I took all this model up there and showed him what I was trying to do, and he didn't seem particularly perturbed about it. He said, no, that's all right. So he tolerated me going up there for an hour or two once a week. And I'd take my panels up there and I'd try and shape them out, and I'd spend a couple of hours trying to get something as well as I thought I could, but I always come up a bit short. And then Mike would take it and he'd spend about 2 minutes on it, and it would be right, which really annoyed me. So, however, it's just, it absolutely makes the model. There's no question about it. I did a little bit of English wheeling, which is not as easy as it looks. But most of the bits here were bloody beaten out of into sand, leather bags of sand, formed around the former. It's surprising how much it'll stretch, re-anneal and all the rest of it. All the rivets on it, there's a combination of 1mm stainless rivets that I got from the US until they went under, or he died or gave up or something. So I was forced to come up with another method, and I made a press tool that pressed the rivet heads through back through into the aluminium, and basically they became raised rivets, which was they've got a decent look. I had to do some of the panels a number of times because it's just to get the fit of the stuff. Sometimes it doesn't fit. You start at one end and you work away to the other, and then you come back to either fit it all together and the front end doesn't fit. So the bit I made the most time was the very front of the aeroplane at the top there, behind the top of the cowl. it just never never seemed to go the right shape I wanted it to, but I got there in the end. Some of the more difficult parts to make were making the front of the radiator there, as you can see just down the bottom by the undercarriage. I made that a couple of times. It's quite a difficult thing to form, but we got there in the end. The bulges on the rocker covers and so forth, they were had their own challenges. I didn't do an aluminium intake. I ended up making a balsa plug and sprayed it with some of that Alu-Clad. You can see the difference in the colour. However, it does the job. So it was an immensely satisfying thing to do. I surprised myself that I enjoyed it so much. As I say, it took about 6 months of the model to do, but it saved a lot it just made the model at the end of the day. The undercarriage legs are basically lithoplate that are formed around some fiberglass moulds or fiberglass cores, so that worked all right. So yeah, that's really where the panelling went from, and I'm immensely grateful to Rob and to Mike for Rob nagging me to do it, and Mike, buddy, showing me the light. It wouldn't have been finished without them. There's no question. Engine cooling. There's a good reason you don't see too many of these aeroplanes around, or a lot of the fully enclosed engines, because they don't cool particularly well. There's nowhere for the air to go, and there's generally nowhere for the air to come in. There are ways you can do reverse cooling and this sort of thing, but Brian Borland built a couple of models back in the day with reverse cooling, and they both all had tightly cowled engines, and they both worked very well. Neil Schrader's also done some, and they work well with them, and we're always learning. So with this model, the air comes into the radiator. It probably also comes in through the exhausts as well. So it goes into the radiator, it turns around and then comes back up underneath the tanks, goes up into this area here, across the engine, and then it comes out through this gap around the cowling. So on the back of this we have an impeller, which I'll just get this off. So basically the impeller is that. We have a very fixed sealed hole here so that the air can only come in through the centre of it and then has to get expelled out through the gaps. This sort of impeller is a centrifugal impeller. It's used a lot in my previous life when I was working in refrigeration and carbon freezer design and so forth, and basically they pump huge amount of air through their centrifugal fans. They don't stall, they just keep pumping until basically the sides of the freezer will suck in if there's blockages. So they shift an enormous amount of air. In this particular case, I don't think I've lost anything as far as spinning something of this weight. It doesn't seem to change any of the parameters of the engine when I'm flying it. So when I was doing this, I sort of had a theory that I would put baffles in around the engine and then just suck it out through the front of the thing without this centre point in there. I should have known better. When I first ran it up with that, the engine got very hot, even to the point when you stopped it, it was starting to ping, which is never a good sign. I actually flew it like that the very first flight, but it was a cold day, so we got away with it. So I ended up, obviously wasn't cooling itself properly, so I put when I ran it, I put some tufts of wool in there to see what was going on, and there was so much turbulence between the baffle and this end plate. It wasn't going anywhere, it just wasn't going out. And then the penny dropped that I had to do this sealed front end. I took the baffles off, and it never looked back from that point on. I've flown this in 30 degree plus days, really, really hot days and given it a good flogging. When you come down, the only part that's warm is this ring around here where the air is sort of still getting sucked out, but that's where all the heat's going. And you take the cowl off, and the engine's quite, it's hot surely, but it's not really pingy hot. It's normal hot. So I've been very pleased with the way this has worked. It's a fairly proven method at the end of the day, but the detail is actually in getting the impeller right and getting this part in behind it, the ability for the air to come into the centre of this and then get flung out. This was made by my son, one of my son's friends. It was a Christmas present, which I was very grateful for. It's probably cost a couple of $1,000 if I'd had to pay for it, through one of his friends with a CNC mill, a 5-axis mill I think it was, that made it. So God help me if I break it. I don't know what I'll do. But you can do a similar thing with much simpler back plates than this. I've seen them, I think when Brian did his first one, they were riveted on. They work fine, they're obviously balanced. But you do have to put drive pins on it, you don't want them slipping. But yeah, it's a really, really effective way of cooling a tightly cowled engine, as long as you've got a bit of a gap, but you've got to sacrifice a bit of outline for that, for what it's worth. But it works extremely well. I've been more than happy with it. This is the aeroplane with the cowl off. Pretty standard installation for a Laser 300. It's inverted. The exhaust pipes go out through the body, go right to the back behind the radiator and just pop out behind the radiator where they're relatively unobtrusive. Now, given that I had to put some weight in the front of this, you can't put this much weight into the front of an aeroplane and attach it to the cowl. It's just too hard on the cowl. It's too much weight hung too far out. So I made up a stainless steel frame for what it's worth, and I hung my lead on out here. I also used this to create this hole for the extraction of the air. So I think this has got about 1.3 kilos of lead in the front, which I cast in an old tin or something, I can't remember what it was. And then we just bolt this to the front of the framework. So it doesn't put any stress on the cowl, it doesn't put any stress on the motor. All in all, it's actually a reasonably tidy way of doing this. Right, a few other things. The paint finish on the aeroplane is done with a Axo Noble 2-pack silver. I had some paint chips that were sent to me from HAC of the full size, or the paints they use for the full size. The surprise for me was when I came to paint the white, or match the white chip that they sent me. I hadn't taken too much notice of it once when it arrived. And then I went to get the paint match to it, and I realised it was cream, and I thought, oh, that's not right. So I had a look at the photos, and I looked a bit harder and I thought, oh, it is cream. It's something interesting what takes away from your eye. Even on the roundels, the white was cream. So anyway, I changed all that over, and it represents the full size pretty closely, so that's all good. The wheels. When I first flew the model and took it to Top Gun and various other bits and pieces, and I realised when I came back that my wheels were way too small, and I couldn't quite understand why. When I went to HAC to look at the full size, they had the wheels there, so I measured them dutifully and made them accordingly. And then after I realised that they were wrong, some years later, I realised that all they were rim protectors on the hubs. So I built this bloody model with the wrong size wheels. However, so I set about changing them, and I bought some, I think, 7-inch Chinese wheels, which were really wide but are slightly oversized. And so I pulled them all apart, made utilised the hubs that I'd made them a bit wider, and sanded them to shape, which is fine, except you end up with an open foam or open cell foam finish on it. I found some Rust-Oleum rubber spray, which is used to seal gutters and roofs and so forth. And basically you spray the stuff on, I put multiple coats on, and then you end up with a semi-smooth finish on the outside. So it worked quite well. I was quite pleased with it. Okay, as far as the incidences of the aeroplane goes, I set them as per the full size. I can't tell you what they are offhand, but the real feature of the full size is that it's got a fully adjustable tailplane, obviously on the trim, and there's an aeroplane going to fly over, so you'll have to excuse that. So I decided that I would make an adjustable tailplane to give me the ability to trim a bit of elevator trim out of it and see if I could get it to sit right in the air as it should have been. So that was dutifully done, and that's worked out quite high. I think I ended up reducing the tailplane incidence a little bit from what I had. One of the things you've got to be very careful is on takeoff. If that incidence is too much on the plus side or it's way too high, the thing will you've got to try and catch it before it goes over on its nose. So other than that, incidence wise, it flies as it should do on the plan, so that's fine. Centre of gravity. God, I wish I'd looked at this a bit earlier. You think when you look at this thing here, oh Christ, it's got a long nose moment. Centre of gravity won't be a problem. The problem is it's got a long tail moment as well. And that's what I was faced with. When I came to check the CFG, I went through a bunch of calculators, online calculators, and decided that 25% was going to be my starting point. And it sort of matched the old Dennis Bryant plan, but I did some further Googling around and found an old NACA wind tunnel report that had been done in the 30s on centre of gravity positions on biplanes, so that was good enough for me, and it ended up being quite a good starting point. Unfortunately, with this, where the centre of gravity is, I think it's about 170 mil back from the top of the wing. It's in front of the bottom wing, so you end up with this really long tail moment that's that you have to compensate for. I wish I'd done that up front long before I even started building the model, because I would have built the back end of the model quite differently. It's got a pine sort of space frame inside it, much like the full size frame is, and the parts of the back end are ply and ply cores and various other bits and pieces. Even though they're gutted with a laser cutter, they still weigh things. But if I'd thought about it earlier, I'm sure I could have saved probably about half a kilo of weight at the back, which probably would have saved a good 1.5 kilos at the front. So you've got to be so diligent about these. The other thing too is, I've got my radio gear and so forth at the back behind the pilot. That's basically where it goes. The batteries are up more or less under the centre of gravity, and the onboard glow battery is up underneath the cowl. So I didn't really have much leeway in that. But having said that, the centre of gravity where I've shown it on the plan, I think it is, it flies well. The only thing you've got to be so careful about on takeoff on this thing is holding the elevators in long enough to get some decent airflow over it, so that when you ease it off, it will just fly off basically. A couple of times I've done it, let it go too early, and things just gone over on its nose because it's got no elevator authority until air starts passing over it at reasonable speed. Flying wise, it's a really nice aeroplane to fly. Once you get it into the air, even getting it off the ground, it's just an exercise and technique more than anything. Flying it around is such a nice aeroplane to fly for a biplane. It's got very little rudder coupling needed, even though after about a year I started using some. just because I could. It's too heavy, you know, it's really at 14.5 kilos. It flies adequately, you can loop it. You've got to be careful with rolling it, particularly because it's only got the top ailerons and they don't have a huge amount of throw on them. So like I think a roll is timed, full throw roll is probably about 3 to 4 seconds. So you really have to prepare yourself for it. Landing it is a different matter. Getting it down onto the ground, no problem at all. It's very stable, does all the things it should do. It grooves like it should do. But once it gets on the ground, it's a different story. You can get 3 or 5 landings reasonable if you've got some strong into wind and you're into wind with no slip. But if you try and get the tail down too early, there's a massive shift in the centre of gravity. There's a massive, because this is a very top area aeroplane as well, it's got a high centre of gravity. Any left and right roll of your undercarriage or off wind or whatever, the thing will just head off in that direction and it's just about impossible to stop. I've had it on its back a couple of times, which just didn't impress me. Yeah, it's just, I still haven't learnt to fly it properly in that respect. I just need to do more flying, even though I've had 30 plus flights with it. Andy Sefton can tell you all the reasons why this is, I'm sure. But in my mind, it's just pilot skill and ability, which I need to get some of to get this thing onto the ground. It's an interesting technique. I've spoken to Rob McNair a little bit about it, and he says that that's probably the issue. Probably the issue is actually getting the thing down on its wheels, letting the speed bleed off so the tailplane sits down when it's ready to sit down and the rest of the wing is not flying. So that you're not creating that massive angle of attack on the wing when there's still a lot of airflow over it. And that's my theory, and that's the one I'm going to try and stick to. But in the air, it's just such a beautiful looking aeroplane. You can't help but be impressed by the sort of the beauty and the grace of the aeroplane at the end of the day. I would have loved to have seen the full size flight. Maybe one day we will. So we'll take some questions now. Thank you.